Predicting the model's accuracy using the k-nearest neighbors algorithm on zoo animal dataset. So first, we have here our overview. We need first to tackle the introduction, and then next is the review of related literature, methodology, results and discussion, conclusion, and lastly is the future work or the future study of this topic. So the k-nearest neighbors or KNN is a simply supervised machine learning algorithm that can tackle classification and regression issues. It's simple to set up and comprehend, but it has the primary disadvantage of being substantially slower as the bulk of the data in use rises. So the KNN works by calculating the distances between a query and all of the instances in the data, then picking the number of examples k closest to the query and voting for the most frequent label in the case of classification, or averaging the labels in case of regression. So it is known as a lazy learning algorithm or lazy learner since it does not do anything or any training when given training data. Instead, it just saves the data throughout the training period and makes no computations. It does not create a model until a query is run on the dataset, so as a result, KNN is appropriate for data mining. We have here the taxonomy of the animal kingdom, or some other call it animal kingdom classification. It is essential concept for understanding how all living species are linked. Animals are now classed according to habitat as terrestrial creatures that live on land, aquatic species that dwell in the water, and aerial animals that can fly. So the diversity of animal appearance is primarily superficial, with a surprising array of known forms. Some very unusual can be among a mere half-dozen fundamental body designs. And so, we have here our purpose. So the purpose of this research is to predict the model's accuracy using the k-nearest neighbor algorithm on the classification of zoo animal dataset. So the zoo animal classification dataset consists of 16 variables with several features that describe them, called the attributes, besides the class to which each animal belongs, called the target. The dataset provides 43 animals from several classes except birds and mammals. So here are the sum of the RRL. So as stated by Ra 2021, as machine learning practitioners, we come across a diverse set of machine learning algorithms that we might use to construct a specific prediction model. The author concentrates on k-nearest neighbor, one of the most complex learning algorithms. So in machine learning, this approach may be used to solve both regression and classification problems. And as indicated by Ashai and Company 2022, the research of several machine learning methods revealed how diverse characteristics such as right ascension, declination, magnitude, altitude, earth distance, and azimuth impact total tracking performance. So different studies propose different classification algorithms. Nonetheless, after comparing different classifiers, it was shown that KNN provided the highest detection accuracy. In the methodology part, so here is, as you can see, the proposed architecture of the said topic. So in this study, the researcher proposed a methodology for zoo animal classification based on the KNN classifier. The purpose of this algorithm is to classify the zoo animals based on their attributes, features that describe them, and their target, to which class each zoo animals belongs. So the animal ID or animal name is unique for each instance. Zoo animals, so you can see here the architecture. So we have here the zoo animals classification. We have here the animal ID, the variables, which are the attributes and target. Classification, the KNN classifier. And lastly, the classification result. So the k-nearest neighbor algorithm is one of the classifier most basic of all classifiers. So the term k-nearest may be defined as the k number of points in n-dimensional feature space that are relatively close in terms of distance to a point. In this regard, the Euclidean distance in particular between a test sample and the trained samples is determined. We have here the algorithm k-nearest neighbor. So first start is get the value of k. Consider all points and the new points in n-dimensional space. Calculate the distance of new point from all points. Sort the distance of all point. Sort the distance of all point and select the k point with smallest distance. Estimate the value of test point by weighted average of its neighbor. So we have here its condition. This is the error of the test point satisfying. So if the condition is met, you can finish the algorithm, but if the condition does not meet, is you need to go back to the first process, which is to get the value of k. So classification is the process of grouping separate things based on their resemblance to the group's description. A classification algorithm generally includes two processing phases, the training and testing. Among the different methods of supervised statistical pattern are statistical and structural techniques. The nearest neighbor rule regularly produces good performance. So the database, the dataset consists of 43 animals from several classes except mammals and birds. It includes of 16 variables, each of which has numerous traits that describe them. In short, the attributes in addition to the class to which each animal belongs. In short, the target. So for the results and discussion of the study, first is we have the reading the training data. Here in input 1 and 2, the first stage in building the KNN model is to read in the data that will be used as input. So the researcher used the zoo animal dataset to begin reading the data via pandas. Here. So figures, it shows the process of input and output of k-nearest neighbor in Python using the Jupyter Notebook. So the dataset utilized are the zoo animal classification. Next is we have this split up the dataset into inputs and targets. Here. So the researcher in input 17, the researcher divides the dataset into inputs X and targets Y. The dependent variable will every column except predator. Here. Except predator, because predator is what we will be attempting to predict. Therefore, predator will be our independent variable, and the researcher chose predator as independent variable since it is binary and easy to classify the animals. After that, after splitting up the dataset into inputs and targets, next process is splitting the dataset into train and test dataset. In input 7 and 8. So the training data is the data from which the model will learn. The testing data will be used to determine how well the model works on unseen data. So as you can observe, we use the sklearn and standard scaler so that the researcher can easily divide the dataset into training and testing data, and the standard scaler will allow the researcher to normalize data values into a standard format. So we have here the train test split takes 4 parameters. The first 2 parameters are the input and target data that was split up earlier. Next, the researchers set the test size to 0.2 here. This means that 20% of all the data will be used for testing, which leaves 80% of the data as training data for the model to learn from. Setting the random set state rather into 0 to ensure that the researcher get the same train and test sets across different executions. Next is, after splitting the dataset into train and test data, we can now build and train the model. In building and training the model, we have here, as you can observe, in input 10. So the researcher establishes a new KNN classifier and set the n-neighbors parameter to 6. To train the new model, the researcher utilized the fit function. The fit function with the training data as parameters to fit the model to the data. So the n-neighbor here is k. The n-neighbor is 6. P is the power parameter to define the metric use, which is Euclidean in this case. So after building and training the model, we can now proceed to the last part, which is the testing the model. Once the model has been trained in input 13, 14, and also here you can see in input 11, once the model has been trained, the researcher uses the predict function to generate predictions based on the test data. As observed before, when checking y, 0 indicates that an animal is not a predator, and 1 shows that the certain animal is a predator. The model projected that the test set contains 14 animals that are not predators and 4 are predators. And in evaluating the model through confusion matrix, here in input 14, the researcher uses the confusion matrix to evaluate the model, and according to the result, the confusion matrix of the model is 82%. To see how accurate the model is on the full set, the researcher used score function and passed in the test input and target to see how well the model prediction match up to the actual result. Here you can see in input 16 the accuracy score y-test and y-predict. The model has an accuracy of approximately 77.77%. So for the conclusion, in this work methodology of classification of zoo animals based on the classifier, the researcher used KNN is utilized using the class predict function to forecast y values. The model predicted that the test set would contain 14 non-predators and 4 predators. Based on the findings and discussions in the previous section, it is concluded that the confusion matrix of the model is 82%, and the KNN classifier obtained a testing accuracy score of 77.77%, thus telling that it is fair fit in the model. So for future studies, the researchers suggest comparing multiple classifiers and determining which model can provide the finest fit in terms of accuracy and precision to the dataset.